When I first moved into Willow Oaks, I expected the usual growing pains of adjusting to a new neighborhood, getting to know the neighbors, learning the unwritten rules of the community, figuring out which day trash pickup happened. What I didn't expect was a self-appointed dictator named Linda Thompson, who seemed to think she had the final say over everyone's lives. From the moment I moved in, it was clear she had a personal vendetta against me, though I had no idea why. Maybe she didn't like homeowners who refused to bow to her self-imposed authority. Maybe she had too much time on her hands. Or maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting for years for someone to challenge her reign, and I had unknowingly become that person. At first, it was small things, passive-aggressive notes about my lawn not being trimmed to neighborhood standards, complaints about my trash bins being an inch too far from the curb, and even a ridiculous warning about my porch light being too bright at night. Every week, there was a new complaint, a new warning, a new so-called infraction that I was supposedly guilty of. But I played along at first, trimming the lawn, adjusting the bins, dimming the porch light. None of it made a difference because things escalated quickly. Linda, in all her self-righteousness, decided that I didn't belong in the neighborhood at all. One Tuesday morning, I checked my mail and saw an official-looking envelope stamped with the HOA logo. I opened it, expecting another petty fine or some absurd rule update. Instead, I found something even more ridiculous, an eviction notice. I blinked. Then I blinked again. I own my house. There was no possible way the HOA had the authority to evict me. And yet, there it was, written in Linda's usual condescending tone. Dear homeowner, after careful review, the HOA has determined that your property does not align with the established guidelines and aesthetic values of our community. Due to multiple infractions and ongoing disputes, we have initiated the process to have you removed from the premises. You have 30 days to vacate the property or face legal action. I let out a short laugh. Legal action? The HOA didn't have the power to evict me from a property I owned outright. But then the final line of the letter caught my eye. Failure to comply may result in foreclosure proceedings. I froze. Foreclosure. That wasn't just an empty threat. Some HOAs had been known to abuse their authority, leveraging fines and obscure bylaws to push homeowners into financial distress, sometimes leading to actual foreclosure sales. They couldn't just remove someone from their own home, but they could, in theory, find ways to financially pressure them into leaving. The problem? That tactic wouldn't work on me. Because Linda, in all her arrogance, didn't know that I owned the very house she was living in. Linda wasn't just my overbearing HOA neighbor. She was a renter. And through a series of investment purchases I had made years ago, I was her landlord. I chuckled, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. She had no idea that the eviction notice she sent me? I could easily turn around and send right back to her. I sat down at my desk, pulling up my property management files. There it was, clear as day, Linda's lease agreement, signed and dated, with my name right at the top as the property owner. I skimmed through the document, making sure there were no loopholes or details I had forgotten. Nope. Everything was airtight. Linda wasn't just some overzealous HOA president. She was my tenant. And by the terms of her lease agreement, she was in direct violation of multiple clauses. Harassment of other residents? Check. Unauthorized alterations to the property, like the ridiculous HOA sign she had installed on the front lawn? Check. Attempting to interfere with legal property ownership? Oh, big check. I pulled up my email and began drafting a response to her so-called eviction notice. But halfway through typing, I paused. No, an email wouldn't do. This situation required something more formal. I printed out an official eviction notice, one with actual legal standing, and walked it over to her house. When Linda opened the door, she smirked, clearly expecting some sort of plea from me. Instead, I handed her the notice. "What's this?" she asked, her smile faltering as she skimmed the document. "It's an eviction notice," I said, crossing my arms. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises." Her face turned red. "You can't do this," she sputtered. "I'm the HOA president." "And I'm your landlord," I said smoothly. "You violated the terms of your lease multiple times. You tried to evict me from a home I own, which is not only absurd but legally baseless. Unlike your fake eviction notice, mine is real." She stood there in stunned silence, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a counterargument. But there wasn't one. The law was on my side. Over the next few weeks, Linda fought tooth and nail to stay, filing complaints, attempting to rally the HOA against me, even calling the police to claim I was harassing her. None of it worked. The sheriff himself served her with the official eviction papers, and when the 30 days were up, she was forced to leave. As for the HOA, without Linda's iron grip, it quickly lost its ability to intimidate homeowners. A few months later, they asked if I wanted to join the board. I declined. I had already won the only battle that mattered. A thought struck me. No, this was too good to waste on a simple email. I needed to do this in person. If Linda wanted to fight, I was going to give her a war. That afternoon, I took a slow walk toward Linda Thompson's house, the house I owned. As usual, she was outside, nitpicking some poor neighbor about their garden fence being half an inch too high. When she saw me, her expression immediately shifted into a smug, rehearsed look of superiority. "I assume you got the notice," she said, folding her arms. "It's nothing personal, but the HOA has made its decision. You don't fit the community standards, and we can't have that." I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "Oh, I got the notice," I said, reaching into my folder. "And I have a response." Her confident smirk faltered as I pulled out a termination of lease agreement. "What is this?" she demanded. I handed her the papers and watched as her eyes skimmed over the words. It took a moment before realization hit. When it did, her face went pale. This is a joke, right?" she stammered. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." "Oh, but I do," I interrupted, smiling. "See, Linda, the house you're renting? It belongs to me. You sent me an eviction notice for a property I own while failing to realize that you've been living in a property I've had the legal power to evict you from this entire time. Funny how that works, huh?" Her hands shook as she clutched the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She had no comeback, no excuse, no legal loophole that could save her. You wouldn't dare," she finally whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I tilted my head, feigning thoughtfulness. Maybe not. But that depends on how you want to proceed from here. Because I'm done playing games. You're either stepping down from your little HOA throne, or you're stepping out of my house. Either way, Linda, your reign is over." Her face burned red, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. But I didn't wait for a response. I simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, holding her own eviction notice in trembling hands. This was only the beginning. Linda was in full denial mode after our first confrontation. She refused to believe that I could legally evict her, despite the fact that I had just handed her the official termination of her lease in black and white. I could see it in her eyes. She was scrambling for an angle, some technicality, some rule she could twist to avoid the reality of the situation. But the law wasn't on her side, and she had no idea just how airtight my case against her really was. The very next morning, I received an email from the HOA, and I didn't even have to open it to know exactly who was behind it. The subject line read, "Illegal eviction notice, violation of HOA bylaws." I sighed, already preparing myself for whatever nonsense Linda had cooked up. When I opened the email, I nearly laughed out loud. Underscore. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have engaged in unauthorized eviction proceedings against a resident of our community. The HOA has strict rules against retaliatory actions and unlawful displacement of residents. Any attempts to remove a member of this community without due process will result in immediate fines and further legal action. Please consider this your official warning. Sincerely, HOA Compliance Team. Immediate fines? Legal action? Oh, this was rich. I almost had to admire her audacity. Linda was clearly trying to use the HOA's authority to protect herself. But what she failed to realize was that HOA rules don't override state landlord-tenant laws. I wasn't kicking her out because I didn't like her. I wasn't violating any HOA bylaws. I was evicting a tenant who had breached the terms of her lease. Plain and simple. Still, I wasn't about to let this nonsense slide. If Linda wanted to play games, I'd play right back. I drafted a response that was about as professional as I could manage while still letting my irritation show. Dear HOA compliance team, thank you for your message. I appreciate your concern regarding unlawful evictions. However, Linda is not a resident of the community in the sense you describe. She is my tenant. As the legal owner of her property, I have the right to terminate her lease for cause, which I have already done in accordance with state law. Furthermore, HOA bylaws do not supersede landlord-tenant regulations, and any attempt to interfere with my rights as a property owner may constitute harassment. I strongly suggest reviewing state law before making further claims. Sincerely, Mark Reynolds. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. Linda wanted a war? She was about to find out that she'd picked a battle she couldn't win. State and federal housing laws are clear. My decision isn't subject to HOA oversight. Furthermore, any attempts by the HOA to interfere with lawful landlord-tenant matters could be considered harassment, for which I am prepared to take legal action if necessary. Best regards, your favorite landlord. I hit send and sat back in my chair, satisfied. Linda could try to weaponize the HOA all she wanted, but it wouldn't change the fact that she was out of moves, or so I thought. Later that afternoon, a knock at my door interrupted my peace. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood on my porch. I immediately knew why they were there. "Sir, we need to speak with you regarding a complaint," one of them said. I sighed, already exhausted by the sheer pettiness of the situation. "Let me guess," I said. "Linda called you?" The officers exchanged a glance. "She did. She claims you're attempting an unlawful eviction and that you're using intimidation tactics. We just need to ask a few questions." I nodded, stepping aside. "Come on in, officers. I have plenty to show you." I pulled up every document. Linda's lease agreement, the termination notice, the multiple violations of her lease terms. I even showed them the email from the HOA and my response. The officers read through everything carefully before one of them sighed and looked at his partner. "This is completely legal," he muttered. "She's not being evicted unlawfully." The other officer nodded before turning back to me. "Sorry about this, sir. This happens more often than you'd think. Some people don't understand that HOA rules don't override property ownership." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I'm getting that impression." They left soon after, but before they did, one of them made sure to knock on Linda's door. I didn't hear the full conversation, but I did catch the tail end of it as one officer firmly told her, "Ma'am, this is a civil issue, not a police matter. Don't call us again unless there's a real emergency." That was the first crack in Linda's armor, but it wouldn't be the last. The next step? I filed a formal legal notice with the court to move forward with her eviction. Once that paperwork was in motion, there was no stopping it. I gave her 30 days to leave per the lease agreement, but I already knew she wasn't going to go quietly, and I was more than ready for whatever ridiculous stunt she was about to pull next. Eviction day had arrived. Despite everything, Linda still hadn't packed a single box. She had spent the past 30 days throwing every last desperate move she could think of to stall the inevitable. She filed a bogus harassment complaint against me, which was immediately dismissed when I showed the police my full documentation. She tried to get the HOA to intervene again, only to be met with silence after they realized they had no authority over a private landlord-tenant dispute. Now, standing on her front porch, my property, she had nothing left but pure seething rage. The sheriff's department arrived right on time. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of their car, clipboard in hand, and walked up to Linda's door. I stood across the street, arms crossed, watching as she opened it. She tried to keep her composure at first, but I saw the way her face twitched when she realized what was happening. This was real. There was no more stalling, no more technicalities. She was out. "Ma'am," one of the officers began, his voice firm. "We're here to execute a court-ordered eviction. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. Any remaining belongings will be removed by a locksmith and a cleanup crew." Linda's face twisted in outrage. "This is my home. You can't just..." The officer didn't flinch. "No, ma'am, this is his home," he said, pointing directly at me. "You were given 30 days notice and multiple legal warnings. You are now trespassing on private property. If you do not comply, we will have no choice but to place you under arrest." That got her attention. "Linda, The almighty HOA enforcer was now the one violating the law. She turned to me, desperation creeping into her voice. "You don't have to do this," she hissed. "We can work something out." Linda's face twisted in desperation. "I can drop the complaints." "I can." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you want to negotiate? After trying to have me kicked out of my own home? After dragging me through bogus fines, police calls, and HOA nonsense?" I shook my head. "No, Linda. You made your bed. Time to lie in it." Her expression crumbled into pure disbelief. For the first time, she realized she had lost. She stomped back inside, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually comply. But then, through the open door, I heard a crash. "Ma'am, step away from the property," one of the officers shouted, moving toward the house. Linda had lost it. She was knocking things over, throwing picture frames, and screaming obscenities. A chair skidded across the floor as she kicked it over. She yanked drawers open like a deranged raccoon. I sighed. "Huh. She's really going out like this, huh?" One of the officers turned to me. "Would you like to press charges for property damage?" I considered it. Oh, how tempting it was. But no, I didn't need to drag this out any longer. "Not unless she breaks something major," I said. "I just want her out." And finally, she was. 15 minutes later, Linda stomped down the steps of my house, dragging a single suitcase behind her. She glared at me, her face red with humiliation. She opened her mouth as if she were about to say something. One last insult, one final, pathetic attempt to regain some dignity. But nothing came. Because there was nothing left to say, she turned, got into her car, and sped off without another word. The officers secured the house, changing the locks as I signed off on the final paperwork. It was over. Linda, the nightmare of the neighborhood, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, was finally gone. I stood on my front porch, taking in the peaceful silence. No more bogus fines. No more threats. No more battles over community standards. And just to drive the final nail in the coffin, the very next day, I received an email from the HOA. Underscore Subject: HOA board vacancy. Dear homeowner, due to recent vacancies, there is now an open seat on the HOA board. As a valued member of the community, we would like to extend an invitation for you to apply. Under I laughed out loud. Linda's house was empty. The neighborhood was quiet. And now they wanted me to take her place? I closed the email and went about my day, knowing full well that I was never going to join that corrupt board. But I would enjoy knowing that Linda, wherever she was miserable, knowing she had lost everything, standing firm against injustice. Life often presents challenges where others may try to exert control over what is rightfully ours. The stories above remind us of an important lesson. Knowledge, patience, and perseverance can triumph over unfair authority. Whether it's a homeowner facing an overreaching HOA or a landlord dealing with a power-hungry tenant, the key takeaway is clear: stand firm in the face of injustice. Many people assume that those in positions of power are always right, but that's not the case. Rules and authority exist to serve fairness, not to be misused for personal gain. When faced with unfair treatment, it is crucial to understand your rights and use the law to protect yourself. Acting with wisdom, rather than emotion, often leads to the best outcome. For seniors, this lesson is particularly valuable. Age brings experience, and that experience should be used to defend our homes, our dignity, and our peace of mind. Instead of being intimidated by authority figures, we should stand confidently, knowing that fairness and justice are on our side. No one should feel powerless in their own home. With patience and knowledge, we can turn the tables on those who try to take advantage of us.